Now, Pat Buchanan has a pretty controversial column out about it. Israel first or America first? And he said Donald Trump has a new best friend, President-elect Trump. Thank you for your warm friendship and your clear-cut support of Israel. Gushed Bibi Netanyahu after he berated John Kerry in a fashion that would once have resulted in a rupture of diplomatic relations. Mr. Buchanan, how are you?
Doing fine, Sean. Happy New Year, my friend.
Well, Happy New Year, and I think you'll agree with me. This is going to be a very, very tough battle this year to get America back on track.
Well, I agree with you, and it's very it is a news-filled year already. Something seems to be happening every day. I can't recall a transition. It was quite this arresting and exciting, Sean. A lot of things happen every day.
Funny, I mean, look at Ford. Ford now has made a decision. They're going to relocate jobs to Michigan. They canceled a Mexico plant, and, one announcement after another that with the business incentives and corporate incentives and new tax policies and the end of a lot of burdensome regulation, companies now seem incentivized to want to stay here.
Well, I think they do, and the anecdotal evidence, Carrier and Ford and these others, where Trump has sort of intervened personally and been successful, I think are excellent, but in the longer run, and I think the president-elect realizes this, Sean, in order to get rid of a $500 billion trade deficit, you're going to have to raise the price of imports coming into the country and reduce the price of goods made and produced in the United States here. And I think he's going to have a program. He's got a couple of folks in there that understand this. And I think if he works with the Hill, he's going to have some resistance with the free traders up there. But I think it can be done. But this is a process really of years, Sean, and not just anecdotes, although these anecdotes are certainly welcome.
Well, listen, I've got to tell you, I don't even think a trade war is ever going to happen. One thing I've learned about interviewing Donald Trump over the many years, everything he says and does is far more calculated than I think people give him credit for. And I think everything is a negotiation. And the fact that a president of the United States is calling particular companies, I'll use Carrier as one example, Ford as another example, and saying this is what the business climate is going to be like. You'll have an open door to me if there are burdensome regulations that are hurting your business and job creation. I mean, I just think that goes a long way to incentivizing companies to stay here. And as it relates to other countries, if they want to put up trade obstacles to the United States, like a 40% excise tax or 40% tax on American goods, well, I think those deals are going to be renegotiated fairly quickly, or these countries will realize they're going to be hurt themselves because of their own actions.
Well, let me disagree here a bit. I think a trade war has been waged against the United States, and we have not fought it. And that's the reason why we lost 55,000 factories in the first decade of this century and 6 million manufacturing jobs. That's why we've run at $12 trillion in trade deficits in the last 25 years, $4 trillion of that with communist China. It's why places like Detroit and Baltimore and inner cities in America look like what they do, whereas we've seen China, a backward place when I was there with Nixon in 72, suddenly become the greatest manufacturing power on earth from a totally backward state. We've had our clocks cleaned for decades because of the free trade ideology, which has had both parties in its grip, and presidents of both parties have pursued. And I do think Donald Trump recognizes this, but what I'm saying is if we're going to undo the consequences of the trade wars conducted against us, well, we played neutrals and were run over, it's going to take policies besides the Trump getting folks on the phone.
Well, I think I totally agree with you, but I also think that the threat is real. I mean, if you read The Art of the Deal, which I suggest if you want to get into the mind of Donald Trump negotiating, his attitude is you walk away from any deal up to the last second before you sign it. And I think he's not going to negotiate a trade deal that is one-sided with, I don't care if it's renegotiating NAFTA, which the Mexican president said he's open and willing to do, or if it's a trade deal with Japan or a trade deal with China. I think it's going to be beneficial to both sides. Free and fair trade seems to be what he's saying and communicating, and then it becomes an issue for these other countries if they're willing to work in an environment where things are fair for everybody.
Well, here's my view. I'm a Hamiltonian. He believed that trade was a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And he said a U.S. trade policy should concern itself with making America sovereign and independent in its defense, in its weaponry, in its habitation, in its to feed and clothe itself. In other words, to make America the totally independent country we were, Sean, at the beginning of World War I and the beginning of World War II, where the United States could say, look, we might not want to get in this war at all, and we've got no problem staying out completely, because we're not dependent on anyone for anything. That's what you want. Economic independence to support your political independence, and the idea that, this is like we're trading down at the mall, I think loses the concept of what international trade is all about, as opposed to trade with me going down to, McLean hardware store.
No, I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is trade can be beneficial to many people. In other words, American companies can have access to other global markets, if in fact it's free and fair. If it's not going to be free, if it's not going to be free and fair, I think Donald Trump has been pretty clear what that would mean for those individual countries. My guess is that these countries are highly dependent on having access to our markets, and the adjustments will be made to make it fair.
Well, they've got to have access to our market. It's a, $17-18 trillion market, the greatest market on earth. If your auto companies don't have access to the American market, they almost cannot be world-class auto companies. But there is a difference here. Exports of produced goods manufactured in the United States add to the gross national product of the United States, and imports of produced goods detract, diminish, subtract from the gross national product of the United States. Now let's take a Lexus car, which is a fine automobile. If you buy a Lexus car straight, say all its parts, and coming off the boat in San Diego or wherever, that is enormous gain for Japan. But if you put a tariff, say, of 20%, and the Japanese decide, hey, look, that'll force the price of our Lexus beyond a Cadillac, and we'll lose sales. If they then move their factory to the United States of America, amen, brother, I'm all with you.
I'm all with you, too. I mean, I thought this was pretty interesting. The $700 million investment that the Ford Motor Company was going to make with Mexico and build their plant down there. Well, now they're building it here in America.
Well, they are, but let me tell you why they make that decision. A lot of these guys, it's not that they're anti-patriotic. It's you're sitting up there and you're an executive and you say, look, Ford or the Cadillac company or General Motors is making its cars down in Mexico. It's paying the guys $6 an hour down there. It doesn't have the pension problems, doesn't have the Social Security. They can make them cheaper down there, and if we want to compete, we're going to have to build them down there more cheaply and then bring them into the United States free of charge and sell them here. It makes economic sense to move your production to Asia and Mexico, just like it did to move it out of New York and Connecticut down to the Sun Belt when those folks weren't making as much money down there per capita as they're making in the North. So you've got to adjust the incentives for production so that the people who make decisions will say, we got to produce inside the United States.
I think most Americans are now understanding that globalism has hurt our economy. The economic statistics, and I have a whole page of them, additional ones, more than I have used in the last year or so, they all speak for themselves, and that includes the trade deficit. That includes the deficit in general, the debt that we have accumulated, all of which has not been good for American workers. 95 million Americans out of the labor force. So if Donald Trump can incentivize these companies by offering a lower corporate tax rate, incentivize multinational corporations to repatriate trillions and invest here, and also incentivize companies by getting rid of the bureaucratic red tape and regulations, that's just good for the American worker, right?
Well, if they put in there, you've got 3 or 4 of the 5 key items right there, Sean. The one thing you're going to need is you're going to need a border tax of some kind. You can call it a tariff or a VAT or whatever. But what it says, in effect, is, sure, you're free to leave the United States and produce down in Mexico. But when those Fords come and those big trailer trucks, you're going to pay a tax to get them back into the United States that is not paid by Ford cars that are built in the United States.
All right, I got to run. Patrick J. Buchanan, happy 2017. I'm sure we'll have you on often. This is going to be a very, very tough year politically. There's going to be a lot of fighting from day one.
It's going to be a very exciting year, Sean.
This is
exciting season ahead.
This is the season where we can save the country. That's what I'm hoping for.
Well, I agree. I'm very hopeful for first time in a long time.
So am I. All right, Pat Buchanan. Hey,